Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So some pretty big news dropped recently about upcoming Magic sets and how they're going to be handled. There have been a lot of changes to Magic and a lot of new things going on in recent years, and this news kind of clarifies how some of those new things are going to be handled moving forward. So what exactly do I mean by no more non-Magic future premiere sets? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Mark Rosewater is the head designer of Magic the Gathering, and recently on his blogatog, this was posted. Hi Mark, I just want to thank you for an amazing year of Magic. I loved Kaldheim, and Strixhaven has become my all-time favorite set. However, I am not a fan of AFR, and it has concerned me for the future of Premier sets. I wish Premier sets were reserved for Magic's own IP. Now, AFR is short for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which is the recent Dungeons & Dragons set which replaced the core set for this year. And as you can see right below that, Mark Rosewater's response is, future sets with non-Magic properties will not be Premier sets. So with this short and concise response, there's actually a lot of things to unpack. And one thing I should probably clarify really quick, and that would be what exactly is a Premier set. According to an article from Mark Rosewater from a little while back, R&D has decided to stop using the term standard legal set as it implies a little too strongly that our new sets are just about standard. Instead, we adapt with how our audience has chosen to play the game. You are all playing a lot of different formats, so we've started calling them Premier sets. So again, when Mark says that future sets with non-Magic properties will not be Premier sets, basically they're not going to be standard legal sets. So moving forward, only Magic properties will be main sets of the year that go into standard. Now of course that means that there still can be other sets like supplemental sets for non-Magic properties. An example of a supplemental set from this year be Modern Horizons 2, which went straight into Modern and skipped Standard. Regardless, let's unpack this decision and why this might be. Now again, the most recent set in Magic was Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and this was a unique set. This was the very first non-Magic property utilized as a set. And of course, that means that this is also the first and going to be only non-Magic property ever legal in Standard. That is, as long as Mark's statement holds up in the future. Now, Dungeons & Dragons is definitely an interesting property and one that they are probably more willing to experiment with because it's also owned by Wizards. So it's a crossover owned by the same company. Now, in a recent article titled State of Design 2021, we got to see some of Mark Rosewater's thoughts on this and other sets. And actually, the takeaway in this article might reveal as to why future sets with non-Magic properties are no longer going to be Premier sets. First up, let's talk about one of the highlights of the Dungeons & Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realms set. And that highlight would be, players enjoyed the execution of adapting Dungeons & Dragons to Magic cards. Mark said this, "The biggest compliments I got about this set were how well it managed to capture the feel of Dungeons & Dragons, both in a meta sense and in the top-down execution of particular cards. Some players, especially ones who also play D&D, said this was the most flavorful set they've ever seen." So with this crossover, there were some successes. Although this wasn't part of the Magic universe, those that played D&D might have seen this set as very flavorful and a good adaptation of D&D into Magic cards. That being said, one of the lessons that Mark learned and wrote about might be a bit more telling as to why future non-Magic properties aren't going to be Premier sets. And the main takeaway lesson was, the set created very polar responses. Mark had this to say about that. "All my highlights, well except for White getting new stuff, were also the source of complaints. Some players don't like us making Magic cards set in other properties. Some players were unhappy with which cards we chose or didn't choose to make cards out of. Probably the biggest single complaint in this category was, where's Elminster? Some didn't like how we executed certain cards. The biggest complaint in this category was the Tarrasque, as they didn't feel we captured the essence. Some didn't like the use of flavor words, others didn't like the meta D&D references such as choosing your path cards. Others didn't like seeing die rolling come to black border, although others very much did enjoy it. While this set was beloved by many, it was more polarizing than most sets. So this is definitely a huge takeaway, and what I believe is one of the main reasons as to why in the future we're not going to be seeing non-magic properties as premier sets. No matter how well a set might be executed, if you're bringing in a non-magic property, there's going to be a polarizing response. And Dungeons & Dragons was probably the safest experiment that they could have done for a non-magic property as a premier set. Obviously, there are a lot of parallels between Magic and Dungeons & Dragons, and again, it's owned by the exact same company, so they can play around with it quite a bit. But seeing as even this, again, let's call it a safe experiment, received very polarizing responses, that's going to be very indicative as to how things would go in the future with other non-magic properties, especially ones outside of Wizards. First up, you're getting those polarizing responses from players who enjoy having these new non-magic properties in there and other players who don't want it at all. Many players just want Magic to be Magic, and seeing a Star Wars card in Standard would definitely throw many players off. But again, as Mark wrote, there are even polarizing responses from players that actually play and enjoy D&D. So if you're getting positive and negative responses from players who actually play both games, well, what happens when you actually introduce an IP that some players just don't like at all? Now again, as I mentioned before, the statement future sets with non-magic properties will not be premier sets does not mean that we're not going to be getting future sets with non-magic properties. Again, just even taking a look at the roadmap from this current year, we see that on the top, we've got Kaldheim, Strixhaven, Dungeons & Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, Innistrad Werewolves, and Innistrad Vampires, all of which are going to be standard legal sets. But then on the bottom side of this, we've got Timespell Remastered and Modern Horizons 2, both of which are supplemental sets that are not legal and standard. And again, standard legal essentially is now called Premier, so yeah, we can definitely see future non-magic properties as supplemental sets that are not going to be legal in standard, and they're not going to be considered Premier. Again, a while back, Wizards unveiled this snazzy new logo, and also Universes Beyond, which basically means that we're going to be getting non-magic properties in Magic. Or at least I should say more non-magic properties in Magic, because again, everyone remembers the experiment from last year with Secret Lair The Walking Dead. And obviously, I've talked about that product more than enough. Now, other non-magic properties coming up in future products that have been revealed are the Lord of the Rings expansion as well as the Warhammer 40k crossover. So essentially, this is confirmation that the Lord of the Rings expansion is going to be a supplemental set and not a premier set. So those of you that didn't want Lord of the Rings in standard, congratulations, you got your wish. And I believe the Warhammer 40k is a commander product and not a set itself. So again, with Universes Beyond, we are going to be seeing more and more non-magic properties in Magic, but none of them are going to be premier sets moving forward. Now again, Dungeons & Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realms took the place of the core set for this year, so does that mean that in the future we're moving back to core sets as well as 3 other expansion sets? I don't know. Only time will tell as to how they're going to be handling those 4 premier sets of the year. What I can tell you though is that there are some rumored sets that might be coming out next year or the year after, and let's quickly jump into those. First up, the domain for Dominaria United was registered by Wizards, so perhaps we're going back to Dominaria at some point. Dominaria was a fan favorite of many, including myself, and there were a lot of commander goodies in there, such as the commanders Muldrotha the Gravetide, Jodah Archmage Eternal, and Joyra with a Light Captain. And of course, in that set outside of commanders, we also got Helm of the Host, Blackblade Reforged, and Tatiova, which, okay, yes, is a commander, but also sees play in essentially every single landfall deck, so yeah, a fantastic card in the 99 as well. So again, Dominaria United very well might be a thing that we see in the future, maybe next year, maybe the year after, I'm not sure. Regardless, the other domain that was registered was Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So we might be going back to that plane as well, which again featured a lot of legendary creatures and some fantastic cards as well. Some legendary creatures we got from that block were Azusa Lost But Seeking, Kiki-Jiki Mirror and Sakashima the Imposter. And of course, from that set, we also got some fantastic cards for Commander like Ghostly Prison, Sensei's Divining Top, which was somehow an uncommon, and Steve. And if you didn't know Sakura Tribe Elder's nickname was Steve, now you do. Regardless, whether our Premier sets moving forward involve Kamigawa or Dominaria or other Magic properties, non-Magic properties are not going to be Premier sets. And again, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be seeing a non-Magic property like Lord of the Rings as a Magic set. We are going to be seeing one, but it's going to be a supplemental set that won't see standard play. Regardless, now this episode is coming to a close, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So in the comments below, let me know what you think about the fact that there are going to be no more non-Magic future Premier sets. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.